Welcome in, and thanks so much for joining me. Today, I'd like to discuss how to work with struggles on our spiritual path, in our life, in our meditation practice as well. And I really want to point out this principle that I live by now that I would say is not easy to gain. It's a practice in and of itself. And I'd really like to share that practice with you and share some ways I approach that practice. And the practice I'm sharing with you here is a practice that I do throughout the day of reminding myself that whatever struggle is in front of me, whatever obstacle, whatever life challenge or challenge in my meditation practice or spiritual practice, that challenge is the path, meaning that is the road of my life. That is the road of what I need to work with to grow as a human being, to grow on my spiritual path, and to also grow in my relationships to others. And so some of this might sound obvious, and some of this might sound even a little bit cliche, but really, how many of us often think about this throughout the day? And then how many of us even, respond to our struggles in life, our struggles in our meditation practice, our struggles in our spiritual path? How many of us respond to the struggles with a sense of openness, with a sense of mindfulness and awareness that, hey, maybe this struggle is the path. Maybe this certain obstacle I'm hitting is actually the work I need to do. So this is an approach that I started to take, I don't know, maybe not even that long ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And at this time, there was a shift in my personal practice, both in my meditation practice and how I apply my spiritual path, the Buddha Dharma, to my life. And this shift really had to do with, moving from a seeking mentality to a mentality of process and working with what's ever in front of me. And of course, there's many Buddhist teachers who mirror what I'm talking about here. And of course, I benefited from their teaching as well. There's many, so too many to name here. But what this meant to me is really a challenge to approach as many moments as I can in my life as something to work with, as a process to face, as not really a question to be answered, but a question to ask more questions about, if you know what I mean, right? So there might be an obstacle, and first of all, I can experience a lot of resistance to struggles in my life. And I noticed that resistance created a block, like the block that I already had became a bigger block, or I added a block to it. And so instead, I started to employ a type of questioning. Now, this is a type of questioning that we don't necessarily answer. It's not like a question we need to reflect on in a deeper way or overthink about. It's more of an open question that we're not trying to answer immediately, but gives us a way to look at the situation, in this case, something we're struggling with or a challenge we're experiencing, with a little more openness, without a fixed sense of an immediate fixed sense that this is bad, that I need to get rid of this. So what that helped me with initially is, and what it still helps me with, is to counter that resistance that can build up. Now, of course, I'm in the process of all of this. I've not perfected this by any means. I'm just sharing what has worked for me so far. And it's worked so well in opening up new ways to work with the challenges in my life, in my meditation practice, and my spiritual path, that it's given me the confidence to remember it more when I do encounter some kind of a struggle or resistance. And it's also showed me new ways to open to life and to even what life is. So there's a lot of really deep things that can come out of this kind of an approach. So on a practical level, asking more questions. That would be the first thing I would recommend or say. So when you notice tension, when you notice resistance building around a certain struggle going on in your life, and this could be a long-term struggle, it could be something short-term that just popped up for you, it could be repeated arguments with certain people in your life. So just taking a step back and asking a question, like it could be as simple as, "What is this all about?" And again, not trying to figure that out, but more turning this really amazing gift we have of the human mind to be open to taking in more information, to even approaching ourselves, if there's other people involved in the struggle, approaching them with more compassion. So to me, there's not only a lot of openness and less resistance that can happen through asking open questions about struggles we're going through, but there's compassion that can develop. Because compassion here means the way we work with and activate around the suffering in our life and the suffering in the world around us. How do we activate around that as opposed to feed resistance, overwhelm, stress? And I would say, when those are involved, really less effective ways of working with problems, either whether those are problems in our life or problems we see around us. So compassion is a lot more effective because not only do we soften around the edges, around the resistance we're experiencing, but compassion allows us to take a step back and to ask more questions, to look more deeply, to look more widely at the components that are making up a given situation. Now, what I mean by this, just to bring it down to a practical level, let's just keep it on our side of the street for a moment. What I mean by the complexity or what's arising within a given situation is, when we're struggling, there's a lot of interdependence happening between, emotions that are arising for us, certain ideas or beliefs that we've formed around the situation. Maybe even there's physical tension in the body for some of us. And all of this is related to some kind of a perception we're having about something, whether that's a perception through seeing something, hearing something, feeling it, smelling it, whatever, or just a memory that popped up in relation to something. So in meditation, we learn to slow this whole process down. That's really what mindful awareness is about in the beginning. It slows down the process of how quickly our perception happens. So we can bear witness to our perception. We can almost elongate it and therefore offer more of a choice of how we want to interact with what our mind is telling us, which, newsflash, is often not the truth, right? Again, that's something you need to experience. But for me, every day I see that, right? So this process of slowing down through mindful awareness, what we cultivate formally in our meditation practice, but also what we apply informally when we're working with a struggle, when we're building resistance, we need to be able to apply that to slow down the situation, right? And then, of course, when we apply compassion, softening around the edges of a struggle we're experiencing, it really can open something up. And so one way I often frame this for mentees and people I work with one-to-one in groups and in my courses is living a non-conclusion based life, right? And again, I don't mean in everything we do. Sometimes, there needs to be the conclusion of paying the bill so we don't, incur debt. Like there's some realities to our life, right? Or drinking water so we don't get dehydrated, right? Or taking care of our health, taking care of others. That's all good. But when we live with this conclusion mentality too much, meaning that everything needs to have this sort of clean ending to it, this can really build up into obstacles that aren't necessary, struggles that aren't necessary. And then, of course, when there is a real challenge coming up for us that sort of just happened, we didn't necessarily, build that up in our minds. We can approach it without building resistance because we don't necessarily need a certain conclusion with it. So you see what I'm getting at here? It's just about becoming more open and wide. I often refer to the example of like a camera lens. A camera lens doesn't necessarily like what it's taking a picture of or dislike it. It just takes the picture. And then, of course, the photographer, the one observing the photo, then can make a distinction. Oh, I want to change this angle or this particular setting on the camera. I want to allow the lens to capture the colors or light in this sort of way, right? So that's also important. But first we need to have a connection to just the raw lens, right? And again, this is part of what meditation allows us, because it allows us to slow down, bear witness more. If we add compassion to that equation, it allows for a softening of the heart, right? An ease that can develop in the body based on that. And then an approach that is actually going to benefit ourselves and others, right? So there's nothing wrong with an approach. We need approaches. Often there's a lot of choices we have to make in a day. Some of them we don't even realize we're making. Hundreds of choices, right? Smaller and bigger. And we don't necessarily have to make these choices out of very fixed conclusions, right? So of course there can be choices, and a choice is not necessarily also a conclusion, I might argue. It's just sort of like, it's like we're adding another factor in the relationships of things. So another way to talk about this is becoming more fluid with life, practicing more fluidity. And I really think, a lot of traditional Buddhism is helping us to do this, not because then we sort of make life perfect. No, but we understand the mechanisms of the causes of suffering. We start to reduce and remove those, and we bring out the causes of awakening or freedom. So fluidity is part of that in my experience, in my opinion. And there's different levels of fluidity. But at the end of the day, fluidity is the opposite of resistance. For instance, water is how do you say it? Ice is made of water, but when water is flowing, it's not ice. It's not stuck. It's not stagnant. So often the contents of a struggle, the contents of something we're meeting and coming up against or building resistance to, we don't want to make more ice out of that. We want to learn how to melt the ice so water can flow. And here that's an analogy for our own emotions, thoughts, perceptions, awareness, ways of working with different relationships and situations in our life. Also, I would say this becomes the path because we learn through this, we grow through this. Because what is a path? It's something we're walking on. If it's a spiritual path, it's something we're practicing. It's a structure of different practices and perspectives and methodologies and relationships. Again, we can make it as complex or simple as we want, but it's something we're walking on. It's something we're traveling on, right? And obviously, when we travel, what do we meet? We meet all kinds of things. Some things we like, some we don't like. So we have to be fluid and flexible to be able to work with both. Otherwise, we're not traveling on a path anymore. So to me, just the inevitability of pain, of dissatisfaction, of stress to come up in human life, it's inevitable for all of us. It's part of life. It's also part of the path, right? So just some thoughts here. I think I'll leave it there. If you have any comments or questions, I'd love to hear from you in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on a podcast platform, Spotify, iTunes, or YouTube podcasts, feel free to reach out to me on my website, scotttusa.com. Sometimes I like to share what listeners, what they're asking, of course, anonymously if you want. But yeah, let's explore this together. So I appreciate you watching this, and I hope this is helpful. Thanks so much.